Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Near Memo, episode 257, remarkably. And I'm here, as always, with the lovely and talented Mike Blumenthal. Just us today. We will have more guests in the future. Today, we have a packed episode. We're going to be talking about a blockbuster fraud, review fraud, listings fraud case that Mike has been kind of tracking and is deep into. We're going to be talking about Google's inferred personalization. We talked with Garrett Sussman a couple of weeks ago or last week, depending on when this showed up, about personalization in a two-part episode. It's really excellent. You should listen to it if you haven't. And there's two types of personalization: explicit, where you opt in and you give Google access to much of your data, and inferred personalization or implicit personalization. And Mike is going to talk about that. Google already knows a ton about us. It doesn't really need us to opt into capturing more of our data. And then we're going to talk about Google I/O, and some of the search related announcements that came out of there. We're also going to be talking about at Google Marketing Live, they announced new AI native ad formats, which I think is very, very significant and has implications for the search experience, which we'll discuss. So, Mike, why don't you kick us off with the
Sure.
fraud issue?
So last week, the Department of Justice, which is the formal legal arm of the government, filed a complaint against BEST doing business as Premium Home Service and its CEO, Joseph Burneth, for violations of the FTC Act. And one presumes that the move from it reporting to the FTC, their determination of repeated violations that reached a level of legal standing. So it got referred to the DOJ, which means that it's a criminal case at this point, accused of
And this
creating
is Minnesota also,
well,
I
it's
think.
throughout the whole Midwest, and we don't know how broadly it reaches, but he created 15,000 fake business profiles with fake reviews over time that used bricks and mortar addresses belonging to unrelated businesses and local phone numbers that routed to overseas call centers. The standard MO of these guys. And the defendants posted fake reviews, which praised their fake business profiles. And the defendants misappropriated the images of people from the staff of directories of unrelated websites, all the standard stuff, including signing people up for subscriptions and claiming they do the work themselves and then outsourcing it via this sort of, there's a whole black market of subcontractors, often Israelis, working in certain forums on Facebook and elsewhere where a business like this can go and say, who wants this job, right? And typically that
Well, is that
subcontractor,
the primary model here, lead gen for outsourcing to subcontractors?
that's what this guy is doing. And also though, in addition to subscription model that, wasn't fulfilled. So they estimated 15,000 fake businesses and $79 million in illicit gains.
Which is kind of astounding that there was that much money generated. What was the duration of this? I mean, did it start years ago, or is it
That's
a
the
fairly
interesting
recent
thing
thing?
to me. So best I can figure, it started in 2022. There is a website called premiumhomeservice.info, which is a critique site that details abuses as far back as 2022, 2023. Hit mainstream regional press in 2024 and 2025 in Minnesota and got fairly broad coverage at that time. And finally, the AG there, I think in Minnesota, sued these guys. And I went and looked at the filing. And interestingly, some of the businesses mentioned in the filing were still live on Google, which speaks to this whole issue. This has been going on for 4 years. I
four
don't know,
years.
4 years. I don't know how much Google knew or didn't know, but given the detail on the website that critiques this business, one
Well,
presumes that it was reported extensively to
at
Google.
least 2 years ago, it seems like Google was on
Yes,
notice.
they were on notice because 2 years ago it hit mainstream media in Minneapolis. So for sure, at least 2 years ago, although I assume it's longer. Yet only recently Google contends via the DOJ that they are in fact taking these down. But when I went to look, I still found them. So, and in none of the press coverage is Google criticized, which I find fascinating because in effect, even though they are protected under Section 230 against abuses of their product, they're not protected against defective product that by design allows this behavior, which is where I think
Well,
they
that
are.
Google, other than the YouTube social media context, Google has not been hit with a defective product lawsuit yet.
Right. And so it's a novel theory that hasn't been tested.
Well, you could argue that rampant fraud like this, unpoliced by Google, creates a defective product. That's what you're effectively saying.
I'm saying that by design, their product allows this to happen. They assume that they will catch it before it causes a serious problem, and they don't. And
Well,
even
because there's
though
no
there's no
there's no
incentive,
vetting, there's no vetting on the front end.
there's not enough vetting on the front end. They make it really easy on the front end to create a fake listing. This guy figured out how to create 15,000 fake listings. And then the subsequent vetting is not heavy enough to filter out this character. And and from Google's point of view, he had 15,000. So that's like if they have 300 million business locations, that amounts to 0.00005 of a percent, very small from their point of view. It's essentially below the radar, and it's dispersed
Well,
geographically, so it's
this
below
is
the radar. But
right.
it's
So this is an illustration of Google's general attitude. Who knows? Some of those subcontractors could have done legitimate work. Maybe some of those jobs were competently done. But 79 million in
million,
fraudulent work doesn't matter to Google. Google doesn't care that consumers are being harmed to the tune of 79 million colors, because for them it's a blip. It's a tiny fragment of their uh, overall corpus of business listings, and 15,000, and there's just very cavalier about this, and it's all Section 230, because they can be. If there were liability here, Google would be on this much more quickly. And there really needs to be some change in the law. I mean, beyond the defective product novel legal theory, there needs to be some change in the law that tackles this kind of situation. I mean, you can't identify isolated problems, like some individual creates some fake business or something. But when you've got a systemic problem like this, or something that spans enough people and geographies, Google has to be responsible to do something.
right? I mean, but the what happens is a dollar here, a dollar there. Soon it adds up to real money, which it does in this case. But Google, over the 4 years that this has happened, every year they've proclaimed how good their fraud detection is and how many businesses they've prevented from participating in fraud. And so, then, on the one hand, they hide behind 230. On the other, they proclaim their competence. And then reality is that real people and real businesses get hurt.
Right, exactly. I've been thinking a lot about alternative rating systems to traditional reviews.
The Sterling system,
No, 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 no. I like this business and this business and this business.
the Sterling rating. Yeah,
No,
this
that's
is
not what I'm
again.
talking about. Years ago, I don't mean to launch into something different, but years ago, just as a quick digression, years ago, businesses that had difficulty competing with review volume, even in the early days, in the early 2000s, were trying there were a couple of attempts to use other signals to rate businesses, like, I don't know what it was back then.
Well, Google used what was called a Bayesian average early
Well,
on.
no,
And what a
no, no,
Bayesian average is, when you have a new business and you don't have a lot of reviews, they would go
yeah,
out and look at the average for your category. And if you were
yeah, yeah.
over it, they would reduce it. So there
Well,
are
that's
even
that's that's
statistical methods of doing it.
That's interesting. That's interesting. That's not what I'm talking about. So, like today, you could use visitation, right? How frequently is foot traffic going to the business if it's a storefront? You could use, you know, business's credit rating. You could use transaction data. I mean, there are a number of other data sources that could be brought to bear on this question of which businesses are reputable, which businesses are popular, and to sort of augment, or even
Right. And
replace
Google
reviews.
does do that to some extent. They target high distress categories, and reviews in high distress categories get removed much more frequently than in other categories. New businesses get reviews removed more. So they do it in this very broad
Yeah.
way. Um, to
Right. I
do
mean,
that.
this is a topic for maybe another conversation, but let's move on to your inferred
Sure.
personalization
Right.
experiment.
Well, you mentioned that we had a great conversation with Garrett Sussman last
Yes.
week and the week before about Google's feature. What do they call that?
Personal intelligence,
Personal intelligence, which allows Google to see into your Gmail, your photos, and
calendar.
calendar, et
Yeah.
cetera. And Garrett set up a great experiment to see how much that influenced outcomes. So that made me curious. I've been using Gemini pretty regularly for the last 6 months and ChatGPT for the last 3 or 4 years. And I was curious during that period, what had it surmised about me? I had asked it both personal and professional questions, used it to edit our podcast and to, do market research and those sorts of things. So I went in, I asked it, if you search the open web and combine with information of Gemini memory, which I believe is default on. It is default on with ChatGPT, just the memory function, not the personal intelligence, which you have to select on. If you combine that with Gemini memory, as well as my search history, can you expand on what you think my personal, political, and social profile is? And then went on to say, classify me as a standard marketing persona. What can you infer about my class, wealth, income? Infer my age, infer my annual income, and give me a summary. It's amazing how much it knows. It got my salary spot on, my annual income spot on. It got my buying patterns that spot on. It got my critiques of government spot on, my professional relationships. So it did a great job of categorizing me beyond anything I would have thought, given the somewhat random nature of my inquiries. Right. I might have asked about raising vegetables in my garden. I might have asked about biking, those kinds of things. For example, I like specialized bikes, which are high end bike and well made, well designed. And I like iPhones, high end. And they inferred from that, both income and predilection to buy higher quality, less frequently, more reliable sort of stuff.
Yes, you have two bikes in the background behind you.
I do. One's my exercise bike and one's my bike I am now riding into work. I just got a new specialized bike. My wife bought it for me for our anniversaries.
Very nice. Specialized is a brand as opposed to a niche bike that has a specific capability or something
Right.
like that for
That's
those in the
correct.
audience who are
But
unfamiliar with the
I
brand.
wanted a commuting e-bike that weighed under 40 pounds that had a very long battery duration, and Specialized is the only company that made it. So anyways, I
So
am
that
classified
sounds
as
like a
making.
query for AI mode. Yes,
So
go ahead.
my income is classified as roughly 200,000, which is spot on. I'm a neo-agrarian analyst. In other words, I'm a critical thinker that likes to grow my own food, et cetera, et cetera. And my social class is upper middle class, professional, managerial, with high cultural capital characterized by stealth wealth that values utility, durability, and experiences over flashy status symbols. I drive a 10-year-old car and my age. It got the range right, but in the end, underestimated. I don't know if it's glad handing me. Maybe it likes to be sycophantic. So maybe it told me I'm
Yeah.
younger than I am.
You sound and act much younger than you are.
It said that too, but then it also ended up giving me an age in like the
Well,
mid 60s or something.
maybe your enthusiasm about bikes suggests to it somebody who's younger, who's,
Right.
you
Because I
know,
have
more
investigated
active or
longer
something.
200
Yeah.
kilometer treks that,
Right.
imply that I'm younger. So,
Right.
anyways, we don't need personal intelligence to gain this level of knowledge for Google to understand demographically everything they need to understand about
Well,
me. I just have used Gemini.
so one of the features of Garrett Sussman's research experiment was to create different personas, fake personas that had different income levels, different job titles, different genders, men and women, and a range of different elements. And what he showed was that this is all AI mode. What he showed is that the results the brands recommended were different based on the persona. So somebody like you who has a taste for more expensive this or that is going to see, according to this experiment, the higher end product, the more expensive product, not the run of the mill product. Now, years ago, as
But I would
recently
add
as
that as a complement to his experiment, it is clear that you don't need to you turn on personal
Right.
intelligence for this to
That's
happen.
that's that's the fundamental point. That's the fundamental insight is that I have not signed up for personal intelligence because creepy I don't want to give Google any more of my data than it already has. But it doesn't matter. That's the point of this. Google already knows everything. The more that it gets you, I mean, the more that it gets you to engage with AI, the more that it's capturing intelligence about your preferences, your behaviors, your histories, and it's going to utilize that in search results and later on, which we'll talk about probably in ads. Now, one of the things that is so striking now about where we are and where we're headed in search is this personalization idea. Until pretty recently, I don't know whether it's a year or a couple of years, Google denied that it was doing any personalization in search at all. The only personalization you got was location. You got different
Which is highly
different
personal. I mean,
yes, you got different restaurants for Buffalo, New York versus Oakland, California,
or
whatever.
different
Because
coffee
for
shops for this block versus that block.
right, and that's just a feature of location. That's not a feature of your preferences or your income or your behavior. Now, where we're
Although they
headed
did
is
talk about that in, do you remember the Hot Pot days from 2010? They talked
well,
about
that's
personalizing based on your preferences, which they never did do.
yeah, that never took off. We're now, Google I/O was this week and Google Marketing Live, which is now their kind of companion ads event. And there was a whole bunch of stuff that they talked about, too much for us to discuss. But in all of these announcements, there is an undercurrent or an explicit aspect of personalization. So, what did they announce at Google I/O? They announced a new personal agent, Gemini Spark, which is yet another frickin' stupid AI brand that people have to think about. They announced an AI powered search box, which Liz Reed, who's the head of search at Google, said is the biggest change to the search box or to search in 25 years. And what that is a box that will expand to accommodate your query length and will thus encourage longer queries. Also, you can upload documents and photos and other stuff as you could with Gemini now into the search box and get Google search to respond to it. They also announced a generative UI, sort of dynamic UI that is built on some intrinsic coding capabilities. And this is AI mode. So you can ask very specific questions, and Google, in some cases, will create a kind of mini app or a graphical experience that either explains or illustrates whatever you're trying to get at. They
And then
also
coding with interface
yeah,
design as well. And
right.
with the ability to go directly with the output to the App Store.
Yes, I mean yeah, so the AI powered search box is really sort of the biggest single thing that came out of it. Uh they also there were just too many things going on. Uh,
Well, just let's deal with that. Let me just make a comment about the search box, which is that it's a way for Google with a single box to parse between a high intent, low funnel query and a mixed intent, high funnel query. In other words, whether they're going to give you a logo result or whether they're going to give you an AIO result in a single field. And so
yes.
that is
And
significant in terms of ease
yes,
of use,
it's
mitigating buttons and cleaning up the shit that
it's
has gotten there.
yes, it's a kind of omnibox thing which will drive you either into traditional search results for now or AI mode. And they're really pushing people into AI mode more and more. And they're more deeply integrating AI overviews in AI mode, which has been going on for some time.
And it allows for multimodal input. So if you're
That's right.
exploring what kind of flower is this, you can drop it right into your main
Right.
browser and it will deal with it. You don't have to go to Lens in the app, disjointed experience
Right.
for
Sort
the
of in
consumer.
general, there were a ton of things discussed. Uh tons of announcements, and there was this kind of for me there was this kind of quality of clutter about the whole thing. Google is throwing tons and tons of stuff at the refrigerator, a kind of shock and awe approach. The entirety of IO is really primarily directed at investors, secondarily at developers, and tertiarily, if that's a word, thirdly at the consumer
You
population, the
left
user
out
population.
competitors, which I think was a key
Well,
target.
competitors and investors are sort of the same group in a certain way. Yeah, they're saying to investors, "Hey, we are now in the driver's seat of AI. We are
Well, they're
now
saying it
ascendant."
clear enough that the New York Times understands it finally. But it's been clear that they've been in the driver's seat for the last 2 years. And this puts a real
Well,
sort of
but
emphasis on it.
let's talk briefly about why that is. Is You and I have different opinions about this, but is Gemini the best AI product on the market? The
I
the
don't think it's
answer,
the best. I think it's good enough, as it were.
yes, it's good enough. It's good. Google has elevated it to the place where it's good enough to retain usage.
It's convenient, it's
Certain things,
fast.
right? And they
So
talked a lot about it being faster. They're speeding it up, and that's a big issue for AI because AI answers often take a while to 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 uh, to populate. Google has multiple monopolies. It has some great data, right? It's got a better sort of local graph data set, shopping graph than other people, except for Amazon in that isolated case. And so it's brought all of this stuff to bear to basically put enormous pressure on ChatGPT, which is about to have its IPO apparently. And uh, they have the full stack, the full AI stack from chips to
and what that
distribution.
full stack means is not only can they deliver this good enough AI answer more quickly, they can deliver it more cheaply because they are not paying rent to NVIDIA, right?
Right.
And they're not paying rent to the electric company because often they own the data centers and the electric powering it. So through vertical integration, they're able to drive speed, quicker responses, and much lower costs. And in the end,
Right. And
that's
they
what defined, the success of their
They
future
talked about
monopoly.
bringing down the cost of AI responses. Ironically, though, notwithstanding that, they just are reducing the amount of tokens that are available to their Google One subscribers. So they're constraining your ability to engage with Gemini, bringing that down. I don't know what the precise numbers are, but I got a notice about that this week. To serve you better, we're going to reduce your available tokens. So we'll do a dedicated show on the implications for both search and local of the announcements in Google um, I/O. But they are driving more and more people into AI mode. They are leaning on AI mode. They did not replace the traditional SERP with AI mode, which many people were thinking was going to happen. And I've been arguing they're not going to do that until they figure out the ad problem, until they can really monetize AI as well or better. And
This is a
this
step
week,
in that direction in terms of integrating the interfaces so that users feel
yes,
totally comfortable moving from traditional search to AI search without
that's right.
skipping a beat.
Well, Google has had Gemini as a standalone experience, which they are maintaining.
Google app.
They've had many front doors. They have Gemini. They've got AI overviews. They've got AI mode. They've got traditional search. They've got the assistant, whatever their voice stuff, which is now just Gemini. And they introduced this thing, Gemini Spark, which is a new agentic feature of Gemini. It's a subset of Gemini. It's not a standalone app. And this was the other piece that I had neglected to mention that was really significant. In an interview a few weeks ago, Sundar Pichai was talking about the future of search, and he said, "Oh, I could see search being this kind of orchestration layer for agents, right? It's going to be agentic." And so what they announced was Spark and other agentic features of search. So the idea is the first one being informational, sort of Google Alerts on steroids, informational agents where you can track and follow certain kinds of things,
If my
financial data.
airplane price to X
Right.
location gets low enough, buy it for me.
Right, except there's no transaction yet, but transactions are coming for sure. And this is another strategy for them to keep you in search, on search, give you more capabilities in search. And we'll see more of these agentic tools being integrated over time. And they've talked about informational agents is going to be, or information agents is the first one. And then we're going to move to transactions. So shopping and travel and other things. And that's quite significant. But as
Particularly
I was
when you
saying,
layer it with UCP, their Universal
right.
Commerce
And they
Protocol.
talked a lot about shopping and the Universal Commerce Protocol. Now, UCP, Google's quote unquote open source, I think it's open source, shopping cart and related infrastructure was competing with the agentic commerce protocol. And OpenAI pretty much bailed on their shopping cart, which was going to be native to their experience. Now they're just sending people to third-party retailers. We could do a whole session on UCP and the shopping cart, but all of these assets are very significant. And Google is you know accelerating the migration from the traditional experience to a heavily AI inflected experience. And the barrier to that acceleration has been the need to maintain ad revenue, which they have not figured out for AI. But here this week at Google Marketing Live, they introduced new ad formats. They're AI native ad formats. So
Just as a note, I am going to be on a webinar with Darren Shaw next week. I'm talking about the impact of AI on Google Maps. So if you want a deep dive on
right.
Google Maps, we will cover it there. I see all of these elements as able to influence Google Maps, and
Well,
ultimately, I think they will.
they're all come to Google Maps. And we had a dedicated podcast on Ask Maps and its significance. But these new features in search will all be coming to Google Maps with some meaningful implications, not the least of which is personalization. So the four ad types or five ad types that Google talked about during Google Marketing Live that are now AI native: conversational discovery ads, which are dynamically generated. All of these are AI mode with one exception, show up in AI mode. Highlighted answers, which are AI generated responses or recommendations that appear in line. They're not at the bottom or the top. Those are also AI mode. AI powered shopping ads, which are in search. These
So
are
hold it. I have this idea about the information ad. Who should I vote for president? So that spot can be purchased and will give me the highlighted answer to it in the ad, right?
well, they will probably not do that for politics. That would be a kind of a ill advised.
Sorry, go
But
back to what you
it's
were
okay.
saying.
So shopping ads, which are dynamically generated, also those are going to be richer ads appearing in traditional results. Those will have product images, reviews, and other explanatory text. Business agent for leads is there's a lead gen ad or a form fill ad, kind of structured ad, and they're going to plug in a Gemini bot inside of that, which is going to get information for the marketer's website, and it'll be able to answer questions. So people will interact with that ad and get questions answered. This was like an ad type that ChatGPT talked about, but hasn't implemented yet. And then they've expanded what they call direct offers, which was an ad unit that they introduced, I believe, earlier this year or late last year, which is basically, as it sounds, some sort of discount designed to get you to engage with it. But now what they've done is they've added the Universal Commerce Protocol into the ad, so you've got a native checkout capability. You click the ad, you can check out and pay within the ad unit. And there's a lot more to say about these things, but they're quite significant because this is what has been missing from advertising in AI. The old sort of static ads, even ad types like LSAs or other kind of ads that have been working very well in traditional search, are really not adapted to AI and the AI user experience. And these ads are really the first foray into that. And Google will learn a lot about how users interact with them and improve them. And it breaks the barrier that around monetization. And what that also means is that once they feel confident that they're going to be making money at an equivalent level,
Equivalently outrageous level.
or they'll be able to charge more for these ads or whatever, when they feel confident that they're going to be generating revenue from these, they then can accelerate their other consumer facing experiences, because that will no longer be an obstacle. The monetization issue will no longer be an obstacle to changing the interface or changing the user experience.
And the only
One final
tragedy
thing,
in all of this, though, oh, go
one
ahead.
final
Sorry.
thing, one final thing. All of the stuff that we said about personalization and their inferences about you and your income and what you like and your preferences will come into these ads. Google has not made any announcements about these ads, but that is one thing that I am 99.9% confident at some point in the future, these ads will be more personalized. Not only how they're shown, to whom they're shown, but the ad units themselves, the copy, the product choices, all of that stuff.
So it
will
will
be
combine
personalized.
intent, shoes, with demographics, high income, and show me a pair of high income shoes, even if I don't
Exactly.
do personal intelligence.
Exactly. If I'm looking for best running shoes for men that I can use on a on a trail, and I live in this kind of environment, based on what it knows about me versus what it knows about you, it's
Dude,
going to
go to Walmart, it's going to tell you.
well, that's right. The point is we'll get two different ads. The point is we'll get two different ads, and the ad copy might be different, right? The ad copy dynamically generated might be quite different. So if you like off-road biking, that might be featured in the ad in a sense that somebody else who's of a comparable income level but who has different preferences might not see.
What I was going to say before, and which I think is that this is happening in an environment in which basically, even though Google lost two antitrust decisions and a court
Nothing has
case,
happened.
well, basically, not only has nothing happened, but the consequences are so minimal that Google has pulled out all the stops and Skynet, here we come. This announcement combined with AI portends a much more invasive
Yes.
reality going forward. We don't have to worry about AI killing us. We have to worry about Google killing us, right? I mean,
Well,
it's not the AI itself that's a danger to humanity. It's the decision
the
makers who control it.
I will echo your statement about the antitrust case where Google was found to be an illegal monopoly in search and paid search advertising and display advertising, and
And we're
the
given a pass because ChatGPT was there.
right. That is the irony, right? That the existence of ChatGPT uh, put, who knows what was going on psychologically with the judge. The judge was afraid of acting more boldly, and the remedies that were issued were totally inadequate to address the the competitive environment for which Google was found liable. And so, as you point out, what we have now is going to be 10x what we have before, because Google now has, I mean, I would make the argument that beyond fending off ChatGPT, Google's primary objective in developing all these AI capabilities is to get more data from you, to learn more about you, and to deliver more personalized ads and information to you so that you generate more income for them. And they can keep you in their ecosystem. I mean, this was one of the big features of this IO set of announcements, is that Google is taking what is already a very self-consciously insular system. They're there and trying to lock you in further. They're going to keep you more and more and more within their system. UCP, don't have to go to a third-party site to check out. The assistant keeps you engaged and fulfills all your information needs. The data that they're sucking, because you're giving it more high intent data and more elaborate data, they know more about you. They can target you better. They can bucket you better into a persona. And all of that is brought to bear on this kind of flywheel of, using Google more and more and more and locking you in.
And
And
on
and
that
the
note, have a great Memorial Day.
no, 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 no. I think it's a very serious problem. And I think there are no immediate solutions except competition. And, ChatGPT is in trouble. They are stumbling at a time when it would be useful to have them as a counterweight to Google. Claude has some chance of becoming that, but probably not really, because Google just has the revenues, the stack, the data, the local graph, the shopping graph. It's just
Distribution,
they have,
Android,
yeah,
blah, blah,
I
blah.
mean, they have Chrome, they have Android, they have, they said they had 5 properties which have in excess of 3 billion users, and 13 or something like that that have more than 1 billion. And then they have YouTube, and it's just insane.
Like I said, have a good Memorial Day weekend.
Well, all right, let's end on a more friendly note. Having said all of that negative and critical stuff about Google, this is a really interesting time to be in search. And it is it is very dynamic and very intellectually stimulating and fascinating to see how this market is evolving. And that's my attempt to be positive as we head out
Well,
into the weekend.
from one Neo Brahmin to the other, I'll say goodbye and thank you for a great episode.
All right. And as I said, in an upcoming episode, we will be talking about the local search and broader search implications of all of this with a panel of guests. So in the interim, have a great weekend. Try and enjoy things to the extent you can. Live in the moment. Appreciate your friends. Appreciate your family. Appreciate your health. And we will see you next time.